In the scorching sands of Tel al-Raqqa, a brilliant archaeologist lies dead. A dagger in his chest and a golden amulet sparks greed and betrayal. Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of secrets among a grieving assistant, a wealthy funder, a silent guide, and a rival consumed by pride. As clues emerge, a hidden key, a bloodied glove, a shadow under the lion's gaze. Marple sets a moonlight trap to catch a killer. Will she expose the truth before the desert buries it forever? Chapter 1. The dust of discovery. The sun hung low over the parched hills of Tel al-Raqqa, its relentless heat casting a golden haze across the rugged landscape. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, stirred by the faint breeze that did little to cool the archaeological digs sprawling below. Canvas tents, weathered and taut, dotted the site like sentinels guarding secrets buried for millennia. Miss Jane Marple, an unexpected guest in this remote corner of the Near East, sat in a wicker chair beneath a makeshift awning, her knitting needles moving with rhythmic precision. Her nephew Raymond, ever indulgent, had insisted she take this educational holiday to escape the monotony of St. Mary Mead. Yet Miss Little, with her keen eyes and sharper mind, found the human drama unfolding before her far more compelling than the ancient ruins. The dig was the passion of Dr. Leonard Ashby, a lean, intense man in his 50s, whose wiry frame seemed to vibrate with the fervor of discovery. His spectacles glinted as he darted between trenches, barking orders with the authority of one who believed the past held answers to all questions. His team was a study in contrasts. Clara Merton, his young assistant, moved with quiet efficiency, her notebook always in hand. Sir Henry Worthing, the dig's wealthy funder, lounged in tailored linens, his presence more imposing than practical. Yusuf ibn Zaid, the local guide, navigated the site with a silent grace, his dark eyes missing nothing. And Dr. Evelyn Strath, a rival archaeologist, stalked the perimeter, her sharp features set in a perpetual scowl. Miss Marple, sipping lukewarm tea, observed their interactions with the same care she once gave to the village gossip of St. Mary Mead. There was tension here. She noted undercurrents of ambition, envy, perhaps even fear. As the afternoon waned, the camp buzzed with the day's findings. A shard of pottery, a fragment of cuneiform tablet, whispers of a greater treasure hidden beneath the sands. Dr. Ashby, his voice rising with excitement, spoke of a find to rival Tuckerman during the communal supper under a starlit sky. Miss Marple, seated at the edge of the group, caught the glances exchanged: Clara's fleeting frown, Sir Henry's calculating stare, Yusuf's guarded stillness, Evelyn's barely concealed sneer. She thought of the vicarage teas where such looks betrayed secrets, far less grand but no less dangerous. Night fell swiftly, the desert air turning crisp. The camp settled into a restless quiet, broken only by the distant howl of a jackal. Miss Marple, retiring to her modest tent, reflected on the fragility of trust in such close quarters. She was drifting into a light sleep, her knitting tucked beside her, when a scream shattered the silencer, raw, piercing cry that sent her bolt upright. Lanterns flickered to life across the camp as voices called out in alarm. Miss Marple, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, stepped into the cool night, her heart steady despite the chaos. She followed the commotion to Dr. Ashby's tent, where a small crowd had gathered. Clara, pale as moonlight, stood trembling at the entrance, her hands clasped tightly. Yusuf hovered nearby, his expression unreadable. Sir Henry pushed through, his bluster muted, while Evelyn lingered at the edge, her eyes narrowed. Miss Marple, slipping past with the unobtrusive grace of an elderly spinster, peered inside. There lay Dr. Ashby sprawled across his camp bed, his shirt stained dark with blood. A dagger, its hilt intricately carved, protruded from his chest. The air was thick with the metallic scent of death, and the sand beneath him was undisturbed, as if the killer had vanished into the night. Miss Marple's gaze swept the tent maps pinned to a folding table, a half-written journal, a scattering of ancient pottery. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, and her mind, honed by years of unraveling village intrigues, began to turn. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the desert night, sharp with cold, pressed against the canvas of Dr. Leonard Ashby's tent, where death had made its uninvited entrance. Miss Jane Marple stood just inside the threshold, her small figure dwarfed by the chaos of lantern light and hushed voices. The air was heavy with the iron Thames of blood, mingling with the musty scent of ancient earth that clung to everything in Tel al-Raqqa. Her shawl, a sensible woolen affair, knitted in St. Mary mead, was drawn tightly about her shoulders, not against the chill, but as a shield against the grim tableau before her. Dr. Ashby lay sprawled across his narrow camp bed, his wiry frame unnaturally still, his spectacles askew on his pale face. The dagger in his chest, its hilt etched with intricate patterns that spoke of a bygone era, seemed almost a relic itself, anchoring the scene to the very history he had sought to unearth. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unclouded despite her years, took in every detail with the precision of a woman who had long ago learned that truth hides in the overlooked dot. The camp overseer, a grizzled man named Mr. Baxter, had summoned her moments after the scream, perhaps out of deference to her reputation as an observer of human nature, or simply because she was the only calm presence amid the panic. "Miss Marple, you've a head for puzzles," he had muttered, his voice rough with unease. She had followed him without protest, her soft steps barely disturbing the sand. Now, as she stood in the tent, she felt the weight of the moment. Not unlike the time she had unraveled the theft of Mrs. Clement's silver teapot by noting the angle of a parlor maid's glance. Inspector Khalil, the local police officer, arrived, with two subordinates, their boots crunching on the gravel outside. He was a tall man, his face weathered by sun and duty, his dark eyes scanning the scene with a mix of efficiency and impatience. His uniform, slightly crumpled from the hasty journey, bore the insignia of authority, but Miss Marple sensed a man accustomed to petty thefts, not murder in such exotic circumstances. He barked orders in Arabic, directing his men to secure the perimeter, then turned to the gathered crowd: Clara Merton, Sir Henry Worthing, Yusuf ibn Zayed, and Dr. Evelyn Strath, who hovered like moths drawn to the lantern's glow. "Who found him?" Inspector Khalil demanded, his accent clipped but clear. Clara, her face ashen, raised a trembling hand. "I did," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I came to deliver the day's catalog notes. The tent flap was open, and I saw, she faltered, her eyes brimming with tears. Miss Marple, standing quietly to one side, noted the girl's distress, but also the way her fingers clutched her notebook, as if it were a lifeline. Grief, she knew, could mask other emotions: guilt, perhaps, or fear. Inspector Khalil knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. He examined the dagger without touching it, his brow furrowing at the carved hilt. "This is no common blade," he remarked, almost to himself. "It looks like something from the dig." He glanced at Clara. Was this one of Dr. Ashby's finds? Clara shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. "I don't know," she managed. "He kept some artifacts in here, but I never saw that dagger." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the tent's interior. The folding table was cluttered with maps, their edges curling in the dry air, and a scattering of pottery shards, each meticulously labeled. A leather-bound journal lay open, its pages filled with Ashby's precise handwriting, though the final entry was a hurried scrawl, barely legible. A tin mug, half full of cold tea, sat precariously near the edge, and a single candle burned low, cast flickering shadows. The sand floor, smoothed by the evening wind, showed no footprints save those of the living who had entered after the scream. Miss Marple's mind turned to a St. Mary Mead burglary where the absence of footprints in a flower bed had pointed to an inside job. Here, the undisturbed sand suggested the killer had entered before the wind's nightly sweep, perhaps hours before the body was found. Inspector Khalil rose, brushing sand from his knees. "Everyone out," he ordered, gesturing toward the tent flap. "I will question you one by one." The suspects shuffled into the night, their faces a gallery of shock, suspicion, and calculation. Miss Marple lingered, her presence so unobtrusive that Khalil seemed to forget her. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes catching a faint smear of ink on the journal's page, as if Ashby's hand had trembled as he wrote. She made no move to touch it, knowing evidence must remain pristine, but she filed the detail away. Much as she had once noted, a smudge of lipstick on a vicar's teacup. Outside, the camp was alive with whispers. The laborers, roused from their tents, huddled in knots, their voices low and anxious. Miss Marple, stepping into the cool air, observed the suspects as they waited for Khalil's summons. Clara sat on a crate, her head bowed, her fingers still. Gripping her notebook, Sir Henry paced, his heavy footsteps kicking up puffs of dust, his florid face set in a scowl. Yusuf leaned against a tent pole, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting answers from the stars. Dr. Strath stood apart, her arms crossed, her expression one of detached disdain, though Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease in her posture, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead schoolmistress caught in a lie. Khalil began with Clara, leading her to a nearby tent for privacy. Miss Marple, settling onto a bench with her knitting, listened to the murmurs filtering through the canvas. Clara's voice, tremulous at first, grew steadier as she recounted her movements. She had been in her tent, she said, organizing notes, until shortly before 10, when she decided to deliver them to Ashby. Finding his tent flap open, she had called out, then entered, only to discover the horror within. "I didn't touch anything," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I just screamed and ran for help." Khalil's questions were sharp, probing her relationship with Ashby, her access to the artifacts, her whereabouts earlier in the evening. Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, thought of a young seamstress in her village whose tears had hidden a theft. Clara's grief seemed genuine, but grief, she knew, could be a mask. Sir Henry was next, his bluster filling the tent as he declared his innocence. "I was in my tent all evening, going over accounts," he boomed. "This dig doesn't fund itself, you know." He claimed to have heard nothing until Clara's scream, though his tent was closest to Ashby's. Khalil pressed him on the dagger, suggesting it might be valuable, but Sir Henry dismissed the idea with a wave. "I'm no collector of trinkets," he said, though Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the side, as if guarding a secret. She recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant whose loud denials had betrayed his guilt over a forged ledger. Sir Henry's wealth, she mused, might not be as secure as he claimed, and a man in need of funds could be tempted by treasures. Yusuf ibn Zaid followed, his responses curt and measured. He had been patrolling the camp's perimeter, he said, a routine task to deter looters who often prowled the desert. He had seen no one near Ashby's tent, heard no cries until Clara's. When Khalil asked about the dagger, Yusuf's face remained impassive, but he admitted to handling artifacts for Ashby on occasion. "I know the history of this place," he said, his voice low, "but I do not steal from it." Miss Marple, watching him through the tent's open flap, saw a man whose silence spoke louder than his words, much like a poacher she had once known who played both sides for gain. Dr. Evelyn Strath was the last, her voice cool and precise as she recounted her evening. She had been in her tent, reviewing notes on a cuneiform tablet that she believed contradicted Ashby's theories. "We argued earlier," she admitted, "but I was nowhere near his tent tonight." Her alibi, a solitary walk in the hills to clear her mind, was impossible to verify. Halil's tone grew sharp, questioning her rivalry with Ashby, but Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Professional disagreements don't make me a murderer," she said. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, saw in Evelyn the pride of a St. Mary Mead scholar whose ambition had once led to sabotage. Pride, she knew, could be as deadly as greed. As the interrogations ended, Inspector Khalil emerged, his face etched with frustration. "No one admits to anything," he muttered to his subordinate, unaware of Miss Marple's quiet presence. "But the dagger, it's no ordinary weapon. It's from the dig, I'm sure of it." He ordered his men to search the suspect's tents, a task that yielded little. Clara's held only books and papers. Sir Henry's a locked chest he refused to open without a warrant, Yusuf's a simple bedroll and a few personal items, and Evelyn's a neat stack of research notes. Miss Marple, rising from her bench, suggested softly, "Perhaps the journal, Inspector. It might tell us what Dr. Ashby was thinking before he died." Khalil, startled by her presence, nodded grudgingly. "You have a point, Miss Marple. You seem to notice things others miss." Back in Ashby's tent, Khalil retrieved the journal, handling it with gloved hands. The final entry, scrawled in haste, read, "The key lies beneath the lion's gaze. Tomorrow, we dig." Miss Marple, peering over his shoulder, felt a prickle of excitement. The lion, she knew, was a weathered stone statue at the dig's heart, its eyes staring blankly across the ruins. Could it hold the secret to Ashby's death? She kept her thoughts to herself, knowing speculation without evidence was like knitting. Without wool, pretty but useless. As dawn crept over the hills, painting the sand in hues of pink and gold, the camp settled into an uneasy silence. The laborers were sent to their tents, the suspects confined to theirs, and Khalil posted a guard outside Ashby's tent to preserve the scene. Miss Marple returned to her own tent, her mind alive with possibilities. The dagger, the journal, the undisturbed sand, each was a thread in a tapestry she had yet to weave. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a misplaced letter or a too quick smile had often unraveled a mystery. Here, in the shadow of ancient empires, the human heart was no different, driven by desires that could turn deadly under a desert moon. She sat on her cot, her knitting in her lap, and let her mind wander. Clara's trembling hands, Sir Henry's evasive glance, Yusuf's guarded silence, Evelyn's icy composure, each held a clue, a fragment of truth. The dagger, she suspected, was the key. Its presence in Ashby's chest, no accident, but a message. And the journal's cryptic note about the lion's gaze, what had Ashby discovered that made him a target? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. A counterpoint to the desert's stillness. She would watch, she would listen, and, as always, she would see what others overlooked. For in Tel al-Raqqa, as in St. Mary Mead, murder was never just an act, it was a story, and she intended to read it to its end. Chapter 3. Shadows of Motiva. Morning sun climbed over Tel al-Raqqa, its light harsh and unforgiving, bleaching the sand and casting stark shadows across the dig site. Miss Jane Marple sat outside her tent, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the distant clink of tools as the laborers, under strict orders from Inspector Khalil, resumed their work at a cautious distance from the murder scene. The camp was subdued, the air thick with suspicion, as if the ancient ruins themselves whispered of betrayal. Miss Marple, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, watched the suspects move through their morning routines, each gesture a potential clue. She had seen such tension before, in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, where a single misstep could unravel a carefully guarded secret. Inspector Khalil had declared the dig site partially operational, insisting that routine might loosen tongues. Miss Marple approved, knowing idleness bred only rumors, while work revealed character. She had requested a cup of tea from Mr. Baxter, the overseer, and now sipped it slowly, her gaze drifting from Clara Merton's hunched figure at the cataloging table to Sir Henry Worthing's restless pacing near the main trench. Yusuf ibn Zayd moved silently among the laborers, his presence calming yet elusive, while Dr. Evelyn Strath stood apart, sketching a tablet with fierce concentration. Each, Miss Marple noted, seemed to carry a private burden, much like the villagers she had known, who hid their sins behind polite smiles. Her thoughts returned to the previous night's interrogations, each suspect's words a thread in the tapestry of motive. Clara's grief had seemed genuine, but Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead governess whose tears masked a deeper resentment. Sir Henry's bluster suggested a man guarding more than his reputation. Perhaps a financial desperation akin to a local merchant who had once doctored his books. Yusuf's reticence reminded her of a gamekeeper who knew more than he told, playing both sides for advantage. And Evelyn's cold detachment echoed a scholar whose pride had led to sabotage. Motive, Miss Marple knew, was the heart of murder, and she resolved to probe deeper. She began with Clara, approaching the cataloging table, where the young woman sorted pottery shards with mechanical precision. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, her voice as soothing as a vicarage tea, "you must be dreadfully shaken. How did you find working with Dr. Ashby?" Clara's hands paused, her eyes darting to the side. "He was brilliant," she said, her voice soft but strained. "He taught me so much about the Sumerians, their trade routes, their seals. But he was exacting. He expected perfection." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "And did he acknowledge your efforts, my dear? In his publications, perhaps?" Clara's lips tightened, a flicker of bitterness crossing her face. "He said I wasn't ready for credit, that my work was supportive, not original." She resumed sorting, her movements brisk. Miss Marple, recalling a St. Mary Mead seamstress whose quiet anger had led to a slashed gown, noted the resentment. Could Clara's loyalty have curdled into something darker? Next, Miss Marple wandered toward the main trench, where Sir Henry stood, ostensibly overseeing the laborers, but clearly distracted. His florid face was flushed, his linen suit rumpled from a sleepless night. "Sir Henry," she said, her tone deferential, "you've done such a splendid thing, funding this dig. It must be a great responsibility." He puffed out his chest, but his eyes were wary. "Indeed, Miss Marple, without my support, this site would still be buried. Ashby was a genius, but he needed my resources." She tilted her head, as if merely curious. "And did you share his excitement for the artifacts, or was it the prestige of discovery?" Sir Henry's smile faltered. "The artifacts are valuable, of course. A man like me sees their worth historically, financially." He gestured toward the stone lion in the distance. "Ashby hinted at something extraordinary there. A pity he won't see it." Miss Marple, her expression serene, noted the greed in his tone. Much like a St. Mary Mead banker who had coveted a neighbor's land, she wondered about that locked chest in his tent. Could it hold more than ledgers? Yusuf ibn Ziyad was harder to approach, his movements fluid as he directed laborers near a crumbling wall. Miss Marple waited until he paused to drink from a water skin, then offered a smile. "Mr. Yusuf, your knowledge of this land must be invaluable. Did Dr. Ashby rely on you much?" Yusuf's dark eyes met hers, guarded but polite. He trusted. "My guidance through the hills," he said. "I know the old paths, the stories of this place." She nodded encouragingly. "And did you ever sense danger here? Looters, perhaps, or disputes among the team?" Yusuf's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on the water skin. "There were arguments, Ashby and Sir Henry, about money, Ashby and Dr. Strath, about theories. I stay out of such things." His voice was flat, but Miss Marple caught a hint of calculation, like a St. Mary Mead poacher who knew when to vanish. Did Yusuf's silence conceal complicity, or merely caution? Dr. Evelyn Strath was at the edge of the site, her pencil scratching furiously over a sketch of a cuneiform tablet. Miss Marple approached, her steps light on the sand. "Dr. Strath, your work is so fascinating," she said, her tone that of an admiring amateur. "Did you and Dr. Ashby often share ideas?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her pencil pausing. "Hardly. Ashby was wedded to his outdated theories about Tel El Raqqa. He dismissed my research on trade networks." Her voice was sharp, her pride evident. Miss Marple, feigning innocence, asked, "But surely you collaborated at times?" "Such a shared passion." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He wanted all the glory for himself. That tablet he claimed it proved his theory, but I know it doesn't." She resumed sketching, her strokes almost violent. Miss Marple, recalling a St. Mary Mead scholar whose rivalry led to a public humiliation, saw in Evelyn a woman whose ego could drive her to extremes. As midday approached, Inspector Khalil summoned the suspects to a shaded tent for a briefing. Miss Marple, invited as an observer, sat quietly, her knitting a steady rhythm. Khalil, his face etched with determination, reported that the dagger was indeed an artifact, likely from the dig's deeper layers, suggesting the killer had access to Ashby's private collection. He had sent it for analysis, hoping for fingerprints or blood traces. He then revealed a new detail. A laborer had seen a figure near Ashby's tent at dusk, cloaked in shadow, but could not identify them. The suspects exchanged glances, Clara's nervous, Sir Henry's indignant, Yusuf's unreadable, Evelyn's defiant. Miss Marple, her eyes half closed, noted their reactions, each a piece in the puzzle. Khalil pressed each suspect to account for their movements at dusk. Clara claimed she was in the cataloging tent, alone. Sir Henry insisted he was reviewing accounts, though he admitted stepping out briefly to stretch his legs. Yusuf said he was checking the perimeter, as always. Evelyn maintained she was in her tent, studying. None had witnesses, and the laborer's vague sighting offered no clarity. Miss Marple, her mind sharp, thought of the journal's cryptic note about the lion's gaze. Could the figure at dusk have been searching for Ashby's secret, or ensuring his silence? As the meeting ended, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to the stone lion, its weathered features staring blankly across the ruins. She approached it, her steps slow, and noticed a faint disturbance in the sand at its base, as if someone had knelt there recently. She made no comment, knowing Halil's men would dismiss an old lady's hunch, but she resolved to watch the lion's gaze closely. Returning to her tent, she reflected on the morning's conversations. Clara's bitterness, Sir Henry's greed, Yusuf's secrecy, Evelyn's pride, each was a shadow of motive, cast by the light of Ashby's death. In St. Mary Mead, such shadows had often led to truth, and Miss Marple felt certain they would. Here, too. She picked up her knitting, her needles clicking like a metronome, and waited for the next thread to unravel. Chapter 4. The Funder's Facade. The afternoon sun beat down on Tel El Raqqa, turning the dig site into a shimmering mirage of sand and stone. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the sparse shade of a canvas awning, adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and continued her knitting, the soft click of her needles a steady rhythm against the hum of the camp. The laborers moved with subdued energy, their picks and brushes slowed by the weight of Dr. Ashby's murder. Inspector Halil's presence, stern and watchful, kept the camp on edge. But Miss Marple's eyes were fixed on Sir Henry Worthing, whose restless pacing near the main trench betrayed a man ill at ease with idleness or, perhaps, with scrutiny. She had seen such agitation before, in a St. Mary Mead solicitor who had fidgeted his way into confessing a fraud. Sir Henry, with his tailored linen suit now creased and his florid face glistening with sweat, seemed to dominate the camp not by authority but by sheer force of presence. His funding had revived Tel El Raqqa, transforming it from a forgotten mound into a hive of discovery. Yet Miss Marple sensed his interest was less in history than in what it could yield. The locked chest in his tent, glimpsed during her search, nagged at her thoughts. She recalled a St. Mary Mead banker whose locked desk had hidden forged bonds, and she wondered what secret Sir Henry's chest might conceal. Her morning's observations had sharpened her focus on him, his quick mention of a priceless find at the lion's statue, his evasive glance when questioned about his whereabouts. Greed, she knew, could twist a man's soul as surely. As a desert wind shaped the dunes, Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, and approached Sir Henry under the guise of seeking respite from the heat. "Sir Henry," she said, her voice light and disarming, "you must find this all so trying. Such a generous man, supporting Dr. Ashby's dreams. How did you come to fund this venture?" He turned, his expression a mix of pride and weariness. "Like a St. Mary Mead merchant, flattered but cautious. Business, Miss Marple," he said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "I invest in opportunities. Ashby's work promised returns historical, cultural, perhaps more." His eyes flicked toward the stone lion, its weathered gaze unyielding, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, subtle but telling. "More?" she asked, her tone innocent, as if merely curious about his world of finance. "Oh, artifacts can be valuable," he replied, his voice warming to the topic. "Collectors pay fortunes for the right piece, a king's seal, a golden relic." Ashby hinted at something extraordinary here, something that could make a man's name. He paused, catching himself, and added quickly, "Not that I'm in it for profit alone. It's about legacy." Miss Marple smiled, her needles pausing. "Of course, a legacy. Like Mr. Fortescue in my village, who built a library to be remembered, though some said he sold rare books to fund it." Sir Henry's smile tightened, and she saw a flash of unease. As if her words had struck too close, she steered the conversation to the night of the murder. "You were in your tent, I believe, going over accounts. Such dedication, even in this heat." Sir Henry nodded, his confidence returning. "Yes, I was balancing the books. This dig's expenses are monstrous: laborers, equipment, permits." I heard nothing until Clara's scream. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but searching. "And that locked chest in your tent, important papers, I presume?" His face reddened, not entirely from the sun. "Private matters," he said curtly. "Investments, contracts, nothing to do with this business." She nodded, as if satisfied, but her mind catalogued his defensiveness. Much like a St. Mary Mead grocer who had hidden stolen goods behind a locked door. Leaving Sir Henry to his pacing, Miss Marple wandered toward the stone lion, her steps slow to avoid suspicion. The statue, weathered by centuries, stood at the dig's heart, its eyes carved with an eerie intensity that seemed to watch the camp. The faint disturbance in the sand, at its base, noted earlier, was still visible, though the wind had begun to blur it. She knelt, feigning interest in a nearby shard, and saw that the sand was compacted, as if pressed by a knee or a tool. Someone had been here, perhaps seeking what Ashby's journal had hinted at. The key lies beneath the lion's gaze. She rose, brushing sand from her skirt, and made a mental note to share this with Inspector Khalil, though she suspected he would need more than an old lady's hunch to act. As she returned to her awning, she passed the cataloging tent, where Clara was sorting artifacts with a distracted air. Miss Marple paused, offering a sympathetic smile. "My dear, you're working so hard despite everything. Did Sir Henry often discuss the dig's finds with Dr. Ashby?" Clara glanced up, her eyes shadowed. "Sometimes. They argued once, about a week ago. Sir Henry wanted to know about a special find, but Dr. Ashby wouldn't say much. He didn't trust him." Her voice held a note of loyalty, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. She filed it away, thinking of a St. Mary Mead maid who had overheard too much and kept silent out of dread. Later, Miss Marple joined Inspector Khalil for tea in his makeshift command tent, a gesture of courtesy that allowed her to observe his progress. He was studying a report on the dagger, his brow furrowed. "The blade is Sumerian, 3rd millennium," he said, almost to himself. likely from Ashby's private collection, kept in his tent. Only someone close to him could have taken it. Miss Marple nodded, her expression attentive. And the chest in Sir Henry's tent, have you opened it yet? Khalil sighed. He claims it's personal property. I need a warrant, and in this remote place, that takes time. She sipped her tea, her mind turning. In my village, a locked box often held the truth, though the owner swore it was nothing. Perhaps Sir Henry's accounts would reveal his true stake in this dig. Khalil looked at her, his skepticism softening. You see much, Miss Marple. What else have you noticed? She hesitated, then mentioned the sand at the lion's base, describing the compacted patch without embellishment. Khalil's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. I'll have my men check it. If someone was digging there, it could point to motive. He paused, then added, Ashby's journal mentions a treasure, a golden relic, perhaps. Sir Henry asked about it often, according to the laborers. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. A man like Sir Henry might see gold where others see history, she said, her tone mild but pointed. As evening fell, the camp gathered for a sparse meal, the mood heavy with unspoken accusations. Miss Marple, seated at the edge, watched Sir Henry closely. He spoke loudly of the dig's importance, but his eyes kept straying to the lion statue, now silhouetted against the twilight. She noticed Yusuf watching him, his face unreadable, and Evelyn's sharp glance when Sir Henry mentioned future profits. Clara ate in silence, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple, cutting her bread with care, thought of a St. Mary Mead dinner where a guest's nervous laughter had betrayed a theft. Sir Henry's bravado, she suspected, was a facade, hiding a man desperate for something: wealth, power, or escape. Before retiring, Miss Marple took a final stroll past Sir Henry's tent, noting the lantern light within and the shadow of a figure moving near the locked chest. She made no sound, her steps as light as a village gossip's whisper, but her mind was alight with possibilities. The chest, the lion, the dagger, each was a piece of a puzzle that pointed to Sir Henry's ambition. Yet she knew others had motives too, and she must not rush to judgment. As a hasty vicar's wife once had in St. Mary Mead, nearly ruining an innocent man. She returned to her tent, her knitting in hand, and let the desert's silence settle her thoughts. Tomorrow, she would watch Sir Henry's every move, for a man with a secret could not hide it forever. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Desert. The dawn broke over Tel al-Raqqa with a quiet ferocity, the first rays of sunlight piercing the haze and painting the dunes in shades of amber and gold. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, sat outside her tent, with a cup of weak tea, her knitting resting in her lap as she watched the camp stir to life. The air carried the faint scent of dust and sage, a reminder of the desert's ancient indifference to the dramas unfolding within it. The laborers moved cautiously, their eyes darting toward Dr. Ashby's sealed tent, where a guard stood watch, his silhouette stark against the canvas. Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the previous day's observations: Sir Henry's guarded demeanor, the compacted sand at the lion's base, the dagger's ominous presence. Yet her mind now turned to Yusuf ibn Ziyad, the local guide whose silent efficiency masked a depth she had yet to fathom. In St. Mary Mead, she had known men like him, quiet figures who saw everything and said little, their secrets buried as deep as the ruins. Yusuf moved through the camp with a grace that belied his weathered appearance, his dark robes blending with the shadows as he directed laborers to a new trench. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to hold the wisdom of the desert itself, and Miss Marple sensed he knew more of Tel al-Raqqa's secrets than he shared. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who had once overheard a plot to poison a rival, his silence bought with a promise of reward. Could Yusuf, with his intimate knowledge of the land, be guarding a truth that led to Ashby's death? She resolved to speak with him, her approach as gentle as a village chat over a garden fence. Miss Marple found Yusuf near the edge of the dig, inspecting a pile of freshly unearthed stones. She approached, her smile warm and unthreatening. "Mr. Yusuf," she began, her voice soft as the morning breeze, "this place is so full of history. You must feel its stories in your bones." He turned, his expression guarded but polite, and nodded. "The desert keeps its tales," he said, his voice low and measured. "I only guide those who seek them." She tilted her head, her eyes bright with curiosity. "And Dr. Ashby, did he seek the right tales? He seemed so eager to uncover something grand." Yusuf's fingers paused on a stone, his gaze flickering toward the stone lion in the distance. "He sought what many seek, glory, treasure. But the desert does not give up its secrets easily." She pressed gently, her tone that of an admiring outsider. "You must hear so much, moving among the camp. Did Dr. Ashby ever speak of a special find, perhaps something hidden?" Yusuf's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a shadow of caution, like a St. Mary Mead poacher weighing his words. "He spoke of a relic," he said finally, "a golden amulet, tied to the lion. He and Sir Henry argued about it. Sir Henry wanted it for a buyer, but Ashby refused." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly in her lap. "And you, Mr. Yusuf, what did you think of their quarrel?" He shrugged, his face impassive. "Men fight over gold. It is old as these hills." Yet his tone held a hint of disdain. And Miss Marple wondered if his loyalty to the land made him resent those who sought to plunder it. She shifted the conversation, sensing his reserve. "You patrol the camp at night, I believe. Did you see anything unusual before the scream?" Yusuf's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The desert is quiet, but not empty. I saw a shadow near the lion at dusk, but it was gone when I approached." He paused, then added, "I told Inspector Khalil this. He thinks it was a looter." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind sharpened. A shadow at the lion, could it be the same figure the laborer had seen? She thought of a St. Mary Mead watchman who had seen more than he admitted, his silence a shield for his own schemes. "You must know this place so well," she said. "Any secret paths, perhaps, that a shadow might use?" Yusuf's gaze held hers, unblinking. "The desert has many paths, Miss Marple, not all are seen." Leaving Yusuf to his work, Miss Marple wandered toward the lion statue, her steps slow to avoid drawing attention. The compacted sand at its base was now obscured by the morning's activity, but she noted a faint scratch on the stone's pedestal, as if a tool had grazed it. She made no move to investigate further, knowing Inspector Khalil's men would be thorough, but she stored the detail away, much as she had once noted a scuff on a St. Mary Mead doorstep that led to a thief. Returning to her tent, she passed Clara, who was hunched over her cataloging table, her eyes red-rimmed. Miss Marple paused, offering a kind word. "My dear, you look weary. Did you know of this amulet Yusuf mentioned?" Clara's head jerked up, her expression startled. "An amulet? Dr. Ashby never told me. He kept some things private." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple saw fear, not grief, in her eyes. Like a St. Mary Mead maid who had stumbled on her employer's secret. At midday, Inspector Khalil gathered the camp for an update, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to yield. Miss Marple, invited as a quiet observer, sat at the back, her knitting a steady rhythm. Khalil reported that the dagger's analysis had revealed no fingerprints, its surface wiped clean, but traces of sand on the hilt matched the soil beneath the lion. "Someone knew where to find it," he said, his eyes scanning the suspects. "Someone who had access to Ashby's tent." Sir Henry shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly. Clara stared at her lap, her fingers twisting. Evelyn's lips curled in a faint smirk, as if above suspicion. Yusuf's face remained a mask, but Miss Marple caught the slightest tightening of his shoulders. Khalil turned to Yusuf, his tone sharp. "You mentioned a shadow near the lion. Why did you not pursue it?" Yusuf's voice was calm, almost too calm. "It was dusk, Inspector. Shadows move quickly. By the time I reached the lion, there was nothing." Khalil frowned but moved on, questioning Sir Henry about his argument with Ashby. "Business disagreements," Sir Henry blustered, "nothing more." Yet Miss Marple noted his quick glance at Yusuf, as if seeking confirmation or warning. She thought of a St. Mary Mead merchant who had lied about a debt, his eyes betraying his complicity with another. As the meeting dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to Yusuf's retreating figure. She approached Khalil, her voice soft but firm. "Inspector, have you considered the paths around the camp? Yusuf knows them well, perhaps too well." Khalil raised an eyebrow, his skepticism tempered by her earlier insights. "You think he's hiding something?" She smiled faintly. "In my village, those who know the land best often know its secrets, too. A small thing, perhaps, but worth noting." Khalil nodded, jotting a note. "I'll have my men map the paths. If there's a hidden route, we'll find it." As evening settled, Miss Marple sat by the campfire, her knitting a quiet companion. The camp was tense, the laborers whispering of curses and spirits, their fear fed by the murder's mystery. She watched Yusuf move through the shadows, his steps silent, and recalled his words about the desert's paths. She thought of Ashby's journal, the amulet, the lion's gaze. Could Yusuf have seen more than a shadow, perhaps, a figure with a motive? In St. Mary Mead, a quiet man had once turned a blind eye to a crime for a price. Here, in the desert's vast silence, Yusuf's knowledge might be the key or the lock. Miss Marple's needles clicked, and she resolved to keep her eyes on the guide, for the desert, like a village, hid its truths in plain sight. Chapter 6. The rivals pried the desert air at Tel al-Raqqa carried a restless edge as the sun climbed toward its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the ancient ruins. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual spot under the canvas awning, adjusted her shawl against the creeping heat and let her knitting needles move with their familiar rhythm. The camp buzzed with subdued activity, the laborers' picks striking earth in a cautious cadence, as if wary of disturbing more than soil. Inspector Halil's men patrolled the perimeter, their presence a reminder of the unresolved murder that hung over the dig like a storm cloud. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were fixed on Dr. Evelyn Strath, the rival archaeologist whose sharp intellect and sharper tongue had marked her as a figure of intrigue. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had known women like Evelyn, proud, driven, their ambition a spark that could ignite both brilliance and ruin. Evelyn stood apart from the others, her tall figure silhouetted against a crumbling wall as she examined a newly unearthed tablet with fierce concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, her angular features set in a mask of determination that Miss Marple recognized as a shield. She had seen such pride in a St. Mary Mead schoolmistress, who, slighted by a rival, had resorted to subtle sabotage. Evelyn's rivalry with Dr. Ashby had been no secret. Her disdain for his theories had crackled through every conversation, and her presence at the dig, funded by a separate grant, suggested a contest as much as a collaboration. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, recalled the laborer's mention of a shadow near the lion at dusk, and Yusuf's similar sighting. Could Evelyn, with her unverified alibi of a solitary walk, have been that shadow, driven by professional envy to a darker deed? Miss Marple rose, her steps light on the sandy path, and approached Evelyn under the pretense of admiring her work. "Dr. Strath," she said, her voice warm with the disarming charm of an elderly spinster, "your dedication is quite inspiring. These tablets must tell such fascinating stories." Evelyn glanced up, her green eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing the interruption. "They do, Miss Marple," she replied, her tone clipped but polite. "This one suggests trade routes to the north, contrary to Ashby's obsession with local dynasties." Her words carried a bite, and Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of innocent interest. "Oh, how exciting! Did you and Dr. Ashby often discuss such differences? It must be thrilling to debate with a mind like his." Evelyn's lips thinned, her pencil pausing over the tablet. Debate? Hardly. Ashby clung to his theories like a dogma. He dismissed my work, claimed my evidence was speculative. That tablet, she gestured to the one in her hand, I showed it to him the day he died. He laughed it off, said it proved nothing. Her voice trembled with suppressed anger, and Miss Marple saw a flash of wounded pride, like A.St. Mary Mead scholar, whose lecture had been mocked. "It must be trying," Miss Marple said softly, "to have your expertise overlooked. In my village, a young teacher once felt so slighted she ruined her rival's notes." Evelyn's eyes flicked to her, sharp and wary. "I don't stoop to petty revenge," she said, but her grip on the pencil tightened. Betraying her composure, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the night of the murder. "You were walking in the hills, I believe, when it happened. So refreshing, though I imagine it's lonely out there." Evelyn's posture stiffened, her voice cool. "I needed to think. The hills are quiet, unlike this camp with its endless chatter." She offered no further details, and Miss Marple noted the vagueness, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead widow who had claimed a walk to hide an illicit meeting. "And did you see anyone near the camp on your return?" she asked, her tone as gentle as a vicarage tea. Evelyn hesitated, then said, "No one. It was dark." Yet her eyes darted toward the lion statue, and Miss Marple wondered if the hills had truly been her only destination. Leaving Evelyn to her tablet, Miss Marple wandered toward the cataloging tent, where Clara was sorting artifacts with a distracted air. "My dear," Miss Marple said, pausing at the table, "did Dr. Strath and Dr. Ashby often argue over their finds?" Clara's hands faltered, a shard slipping from her fingers. "All the time," she said quietly. Evelyn thought Dr. Ashby stole her ideas, especially about the trade routes. She was furious when he claimed that tablet for his own theory. Her voice held a note of unease, and Miss Marple, recalling a St. Mary Mead maid who had overheard a quarrel, pressed gently, "Did you hear them argue that day?" Clara nodded, her eyes downcast. "In his tent, in the afternoon." Evelyn shouted that he'd regret dismissing her. I didn't think much of it then." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind noting the threat, however veiled. At noon, Inspector Khalil called a brief meeting, his face lined with the strain of a case growing more complex. Miss Marple, invited as a quiet observer, sat at the edge, her knitting a soft counterpoint to his clipped updates. The analysis of the sand on the dagger's hilt confirmed it came from beneath the lion, strengthening the link to Ashby's journal entry about the lion's gaze. Khalil revealed a new find, a scrap of cloth, caught on a thorn near the lion, its weave matching the shawls worn by the camp staff. "It could belong to anyone," he said, his eyes sweeping the suspects. "But it was fresh, not weathered." Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but Miss Marple noticed her fingers clench, as if suppressing a reaction. Sir Henry muttered about sloppy police work, while Yusuf's gaze was fixed on the ground, unreadable. Clara's eyes widened, her hands twisting in her lap. Khalil questioned Evelyn directly, his tone sharp. "You were in the hills, you say. Did you pass the lion statue on your walk?" Evelyn's chin lifted, her voice steady. "I stayed higher up, away from the dig. I saw nothing. Yet Miss Marple caught a flicker of defiance, like a St. Mary Mead scholar defending a flawed thesis." Khalil pressed further, asking about her argument with Ashby. "A professional disagreement," she said, her tone icy. "He was wrong about the tablet, and I told him so. That's not a motive for murder." Khalil's eyes narrowed, but he let her go, turning to the others with similar questions. Each met with denials or vague alibis, As the meeting ended, Miss Marple approached the lion statue, her steps slow to avoid attention. The thorn where the cloth was found was low, near the base, suggesting someone had crouched or knelt. She recalled the compacted sand and the faint scratch on the pedestal. Now more convinced that someone had been searching for Ashby's rumored relic, she shared her observation with Khalil, her voice mild. "Inspector, that cloth, might it suggest someone was looking for something specific, perhaps under the lion?" Khalil frowned, but nodded. "We'll dig there tomorrow, carefully. If there's a relic, it could explain why Ashby was killed." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright. "In my village, a hidden treasure once led to a theft. People do desperate things for what they value." As evening fell, the camp gathered for a tense supper, the firelight casting long shadows. Miss Marple watched Evelyn, who sat apart, her gaze fixed on her notes but her posture rigid. Sir Henry spoke loudly of the dig's future, but his eyes strayed to Evelyn, as if gauging her mood. Yusuf moved silently, serving tea, his eyes missing nothing. Clara ate little, her hands trembling. Miss Marple, slicing her bread with care, thought of a St. Mary Mead dinner where a guest's silence had betrayed her guilt. Evelyn's pride, she suspected, was a fire that could burn brightly or destructively. She recalled the threat Clara had overheard, the cloth near the lion, the shadow at dusk. Could Evelyn's ambition have driven her to silence Ashby, ensuring her theories prevailed? Before retiring, Miss Marple took a final stroll past Evelyn's tent, noting the flicker of a lantern within and the faint sound of papers rustling. She paused, her steps silent, and caught a glimpse of Evelyn sketching the lion statue, her pencil strokes sharp and precise. Miss Marple's mind turned, piecing together the fragments: Evelyn's rivalry, her unverified walk, the cloth, the lion. In St. Mary Mead, pride had once led a woman to destroy a rival's work. Here, in the desert's ancient embrace, could it have led to murder? Miss Marple returned to her tent, her knitting in hand, her thoughts weaving a pattern that grew clearer with each passing hour. Chapter 7. The Lion's Secret. That desert morning, at Tel al-Raqqa, dawned with a brittle clarity, the sun slicing through the haze to illuminate the ancient ruins in stark relief. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her customary spot beneath the canvas awning, sipped her tea and let her knitting needles move with their steady rhythm, her eyes scanning the camp with the quiet vigilance of a St. Mary Mead observer. The laborers worked with a subdued intensity, their tools striking earth under the watchful gaze of Inspector Halil's men, who patrolled the site to ensure no evidence was disturbed. The air was thick with anticipation, for Khalil had announced a new excavation beneath the stone lion. Prompted by Miss Marple's suggestion and the cryptic note in Dr. Ashby's journal, the key lies beneath the lion's gaze. Miss Marple, her mind as sharp as the desert light, felt the puzzle of Ashby's murder drawing tighter, each suspect's motives and movements weaving a complex pattern. The stone lion, weathered by centuries, stood as the dig's silent sentinel, its carved eyes staring across the ruins with an eerie permanence. Miss Marple had noted the compacted sand at its base, the faint scratch on its pedestal, and the scrap of cloth caught on a nearby thorn clues that suggested someone had sought something hidden, perhaps the golden amulet Yusuf had mentioned. She recalled a St. Mary Mead mystery, where a hidden cache of letters beneath a church floor had revealed a scandal. Here the lion's secret might unlock not just a treasure, but the truth behind a murder. Her thoughts turned to the suspects: Clara's quiet resentment, Sir Henry's greed, Yusuf's guarded knowledge, and Evelyn's burning pride. Each had a reason to covet Ashby's find, but who had turned desire into violence? As the laborers began their careful work beneath the lion, Miss Marple wandered closer, her steps slow to avoid suspicion. Inspector Khalil supervised his face, set with determination, while Clara, Sir Henry, Yusuf, and Evelyn watched from a distance, their expressions a gallery of tension. Clara clutched her notebook, her eyes darting nervously. Sir Henry stood with arms crossed, his florid face flushed with something more than heat. Yusuf's gaze was steady but impenetrable, like the desert itself, and Evelyn's lips were pressed tight, her posture rigid with barely concealed impatience. Miss Marple, feigning interest in a nearby trench, observed their reactions, much as she had once watched a St. Mary Mead congregation for signs of guilt during a sermon on theft. The excavation proceeded with meticulous care, the laborers brushing away layers of sand to reveal a stone slab, its edges worn but intact. Khalil ordered it lifted, and as the slab was raised, a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Beneath lay a shallow chamber, its walls lined with faded carvings of winged figures and cuneiform script. At its center, nestled in a bed of dust, gleamed a golden amulet, its surface etched with intricate spirals and a single staring eye. The camp erupted in murmurs, the laborers whispering of curses and blessings, while Halil's men secured the area. Miss Marple, her heart quickening, saw the amulet's beauty, but also its danger, a prize worth killing for. Much like a St. Mary Mead heirloom that had sparked a family feud, Khalil, his voice sharp, ordered the amulet placed in a locked case, to be guarded until it could be sent to a museum in Cairo. "This is what Ashby died for," he declared, his eyes sweeping the suspects. Someone knew it was here. Sir Henry's face lit with a hungry gleam, quickly masked by a cough. Clara's hands trembled, her notebook slipping to the ground. Yusuf's expression remained unchanged, but his fingers twitched, as if resisting an urge to reach out. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on the amulet with a scholar's intensity or a predator's. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked under her arm, noted each reaction. Recalling a St. Mary Mead auction where covetous glances had betrayed a thief, she approached Khalil as the crowd dispersed, her voice soft but clear. "Inspector, that amulet matches Yusuf's description, does it not? And the cloth near the lion, the sand, the scratchel suggests someone searched here before." Khalil nodded, his brow furrowed. "Yes, Miss Marple, the cloth matches the camp's shawls, but it could belong to anyone. The sand and scratch confirm someone was digging, likely the night Ashby died." He paused, then added, "Ashby's journal mentioned a buyer in Cairo. If someone planned to sell this, they'd need to silence him." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "In my village, a man once killed to keep a sale secret. Greed, or fear of exposure, can drive a desperate act." Returning to her awning, Miss Marple reflected on the amulet's discovery. It was no mere artifact but a motive, its golden allure pulling at the suspect's desires. She recalled her conversations, Clara's bitterness at being overlooked, Sir Henry's obsession with profit, Yusuf's cryptic hints about the lion, Evelyn's fury at Ashby's dismissal. Each had reason to seek the amulet, but who had known its exact location? She thought of the shadow seen at dusk, the dagger taken from Ashby's tent, the wiped hilt. The killer was clever, she mused, but even cleverness left traces. Like a St. Mary Mead baker who had betrayed himself with a smudge of flour at midday. Miss Marple joined Clara at the cataloguing tent, offering a sympathetic smile. "My dear, that amulet must be a triumph for Dr. Ashby's work. Did he ever speak of it to you?" Clara's face paled, her fingers fumbling with a shard. "Not directly," she said. "He was secretive, said it was too important to share yet. But I overheard him tell Sir Henry it could change everything." Sir Henry was excited. Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple saw fear in her eyes. Like a St. Mary Mead maid who had heard too much and feared the consequences, and did. "Anyone else know?" Miss Marple asked gently. Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Yusuf. He was there when they argued. He didn't say anything, but he listened." Later, Miss Marple found Yusuf near the laborers' tents, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. "Mr. Yusuf," she said, her tone warm, "that amulet is remarkable. Did you suspect it was there, with your knowledge of the land? He met her gaze, his face a mask. The desert hides many things, Miss Marple. Ashby found one, but he was not the first to seek it. His words were careful, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead poacher who spoke in riddles to guard his secrets. And the argument you heard between Ashby and Sir Henry, she prompted. Yusuf's jaw tightened. Sir Henry wanted the amulet for a buyer. Ashby refused, said it belonged to history. They were loud, careless. His tone held a trace of scorn, and Miss Marple wondered if he disapproved of their greed or envied it. As evening approached, Miss Marple sat by the campfire, her knitting a steady rhythm as the camp gathered for a tense meal. Sir Henry spoke of the amulet's value, his voice too eager, while Evelyn argued for its academic significance, her eyes flashing. Yusuf served tea, his movements silent, and Clara ate little, her gaze distant. Miss Marple, cutting her bread with care, watched their interactions, seeing in them the same undercurrents she had observed at St. Mary Mead dinners, where secrets simmered beneath polite talk. The amulet, now locked away, was a catalyst, drawing out truths hidden in the suspects' hearts. Before retiring, Miss Marple took a final stroll past the lion, now guarded by Halil's men. The chamber beneath was sealed, but its discovery lingered in her mind, a piece of the puzzle that pointed to motive. She thought of the shadow, the cloth, the dagger, each a thread leading to the killer. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden treasure had once sparked betrayal. Here, the lion's secret had sparked murder. Miss Marple returned to her tent, her knitting in hand, her thoughts weaving a pattern that grew ever clearer. The amulet was found, but the truth remained buried, and she would dig for it with the patience of one who knew human nature never changed, whether under village oaks or desert stars. Chapter 8. Threads of Suspicion. The desert night enveloped Tel al-Raqqa, its vast silence broken only by the crackle of the campfire and the distant call of a night bird. Miss Jane Marple sat near the flames, her knitting needles moving with their familiar cadence, her eyes reflecting the firelight as she observed the camp's uneasy gathering. The discovery of the golden amulet beneath the stone lion had electrified the dig, stirring whispers of treasure and treachery among the laborers, and tightening the web of suspicion around the suspects. Inspector Halil's men stood guard over the locked case containing the amulet, their lanterns casting long shadows across the sand. Miss Marple, her mind as sharp as the desert stars, felt the threads of the mystery drawing together: Clara's hidden resentment, Sir Henry's avowal, Yusuf's cryptic knowledge, Evelyn's wounded pride. Each was a strand, but the killer's hand remained elusive, like a St. Mary Mead secret whispered behind closed doors. The evening meal had been a tense affair. The suspects seated in a loose circle around the fire, their faces illuminated by flickering light. Clara picked at her food, her hands unsteady, her eyes avoiding the others. Sir Henry, his florid face flushed with more than wine, spoke loudly of the amulet's value, his words directed at no one in particular, but carrying a salesman's pitch. Yusuf served tea with his usual silence, his dark eyes scanning the group, as if reading their thoughts. Evelyn, her posture rigid, countered Sir Henry's mercantile talk with sharp remarks about the amulet's historical significance, her voice laced with disdain. Miss Marple, slicing her bread with care, noted their interactions, recalling a St. Mary Mead supper where a guest's forced cheer had masked a guilty heart. She had spent the day reflecting on the amulet's discovery and its implications. The journal's note about the lion's gaze, the compacted sand, the scratched pedestal, the torn clothal pointed to someone seeking the relic before Ashby's death. The dagger, taken from his tent, suggested intimacy with his work, and its wiped hilt spoke of calculation. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Sir Henry, whose greed seemed the loudest note in the camp's uneasy symphony. His locked chest, his quick mention of a Cairo buyer, his nervous glance at the lion, each was a clue. like the nervous ticks of a St. Mary mead merchant who had cheated his partner. Yet she knew better than to fix on one suspect too soon, as a hasty vicar's wife had once done, nearly condemning an innocent man. Miss Marple rose, her shawl drawn against the night's chill, and approached the group with the disarming air of an elderly spinster. "Such a remarkable find today," she said, her voice gentle as she settled near Clara. "It must make Dr. Ashby's work feel so alive, my dear." Clara's eyes flickered with unease, her fingers twisting a napkin. "It's what he dreamed of," she murmured. "He'd have been so proud." Her voice caught, and Miss Marple saw a flicker of something grief, or perhaps guilt, like a St. Mary mead maid who had concealed her master's misdeeds. "Did he share his plans for it?" Miss Marple asked, her tone kind. Clara shook her head. "He said it was for a museum, not for sale." Sir Henry didn't like that. Her glance darted to Sir Henry, who was boasting to a laborer about the amulet's market value. Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry, her smile polite. "You must be thrilled, Sir Henry, to see your investment bear such fruit." He puffed out his chest, but his eyes were wary. "A triumph, Miss Marple. That amulet could fetch a fortune in Cairo purely for the dig's funding, of course." His laugh was too loud, and Miss Marple noted the forced joviality, like a St. Mary mead banker who had overstated his wealth to hide debts. "And you knew of it before?" she asked, her voice innocent. "Dr. Ashby must have trusted you with such secrets." Sir Henry's smile faltered. "He mentioned a relic, yes, but he was cagey, always was." His hand brushed his pocket, as if checking for something, and Miss Marple wondered about the locked chest in his tent. "Why, USUF. Pouring tea," paused nearby, and Miss Marple seized the moment. "Mr. Yusuf, you knew of the amulet's hiding place, didn't you? Your stories of the desert are so vivid." His eyes met hers, unreadable but steady. "I know the land's tales," he said. "Ashby found the amulet, not I, but men have died for less." His words were soft, almost a warning, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary mead poacher whose cryptic hints had led to a smuggler's cache. Did Yusuf know more than he admitted, or was he merely guarding his own role? Evelyn, sitting apart, looked up from her notebook, her expression one of thinly veiled contempt. Miss Marple approached, her tone admiring. "Dr. Strath, the amulet must be a scholar's dream. Did Dr. Ashby consult you on its significance?" Evelyn's lips curled slightly. "He wouldn't have known its true value. It's a trade seal, likely Akkadian, proof of my theories. Not his." Her voice was sharp, and Miss Marple saw the pride that burned within her, like a St. Mary mead scholar who had sabotaged a rival's lecture. "You must have discussed it with him," Miss Marple pressed gently. Evelyn's eyes flashed. "I tried. He dismissed me, as always. His loss." The venom in her tone was subtle, but Miss Marple noted it, a thread of motive as clear as a village grudge. As the meal ended, Inspector Khalil joined the group, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to yield. He shared a new finding. A laborer had found a small key, half buried near the lion, its metal tarnished but distinct. "Cute. Doesn't match the amulet's case," he said, his eyes scanning the suspects. "But it could fit a lock in the camp, perhaps a chest." Sir Henry's face reddened, his hand moving to his pocket again. Clara's eyes widened, her napkin crumpling. Yusuf's expression remained impassive, but his fingers stilled on the teapot. Evelyn's gaze was steady, almost defiant. Miss Marple, her knitting paused, thought of a St. Mary mead theft where a key had unlocked not just a box but a motive. She approached Khalil later, as he inspected the key under a lantern. "Inspector," she said softly, "that key might have belonged to Sir Henry's chest. He's been so protective of it." Khalil nodded, his skepticism softened by her earlier insights. "I've requested a warrant, but it's delayed. If That chest holds evidence. We'll know soon. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. In my village, a locked box often held the truth, though the owner swore it was nothing. Sir Henry's eagerness for the amulet. It's worth watching. Khalil raised an eyebrow but jotted a note. You see much, Miss Marple. I'll have to. My men keep an eye on him. Before retiring, Miss Marple took a final stroll past Sir Henry's tent, her steps silent on the sand. The lantern within flickered, and she glimpsed a shadow moving near the locked chest, as if checking its security. She paused, her heart steady, and recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant who had guarded stolen goods with similar care. Returning to her tent, she sat with her knitting, her thoughts weaving the day's clues. Sir Henry's slip about a Cairo buyer, Clara's fear, Yusuf's cryptic warning, Evelyn's venom, the key near the lion. The amulet was a beacon, drawing out desires, but the key, she sensed, might unlock the killer's identity. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden truth had once surfaced at a village fete. Here, in the desert's embrace, Miss Marple would wait, her needles clicking for the threads of suspicion to form a clearer pattern. Chapter 9. A net of moonlight. The desert night at Tel al-Raqqa was a tapestry of shadows, woven with the silver threads of moonlight that bathed the ancient ruins in an ethereal glow. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tightly against the chill, sat just inside her tent, her knitting needle silent for once, her eyes fixed on the camp's quiet expanse. The fire had dwindled to embers, and the laborers' tents were dark, their occupants lulled by exhaustion or fear. Inspector Halil. Men stood guard over the locked case containing the golden amulet, their lanterns casting pools of light that danced across the sand. The discovery of the amulet and the tarnished key near the lion statue had tightened the noose of suspicion, and Miss Marple felt the mystery's threads: Clara's fear, Sir Henry's greed, Yusuf's secrecy, Evelyn's pride drawing ever closer to the truth. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unraveled a theft by watching a village dance under moonlight. Here, she sensed, the desert's silence might reveal a killer. The camp's tension had grown palpable since the amulet's unveiling, each suspect's glance and gesture heavy with unspoken thoughts. Miss Marple's mind turned to Sir Henry Worthing, whose eagerness for the amulet and guarded demeanor around his locked chest suggested a man with much to hide. His slip about a Cairo buyer, caught during the campfire talk, echoed in her memory, much like a St. Mary Mead merchant's careless boast that had betrayed his fraud. Yet she knew the other's Clara's trembling loyalty, Yusuf's cryptic knowledge, Evelyn's burning ambition held their own secrets. The key, small and unassuming, was a new piece in the puzzle, its purpose unclear, but its presence near. The lion, a clue that could not be ignored. Miss Marple, her thoughts as sharp as the desert stars, resolved to set a trap, to draw the killer into the open. As she had once done with a carefully placed rumor in her village, she approached Inspector Khalil at dawn. As he reviewed his notes in the command tent, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to yield. "Inspector," she said, her voice soft but firm, "that key you found it may unlock more than a chest. If the amulet is the motive, someone may try to claim it before it's sent to Cairo." Halil's eyes narrowed, his skepticism tempered by her earlier insights. "You suggest a trap, Miss Marple?" She nodded, her expression serene. "In my village, we once caught a thief by announcing a false sale of stolen goods. If you say the amulet will be moved tomorrow, the guilty may act tonight." Khalil considered, then nodded. "It's worth a try. I'll spread the word at breakfast discreetly." At the morning meal, Khalil made the announcement with calculated casualness, his voice carrying over the clatter of tin plates. "The amulet will be transported to Cairo tomorrow for safekeeping," he said, his eyes scanning the suspects. "It's too valuable to remain here." Clara's fork paused, her face paling. Sir Henry's jaw tightened, his hand brushing his pocket as if checking for something. Yusuf's gaze remained steady, but his fingers stilled on his cup. Evelyn's lips curled in a faint smirk, as if dismissing the news, but her eyes flicked toward the guarded case. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted each reaction, her mind cataloging them like a St. Mary Mead gossip noting glances at a church bazaar. She spent the day observing, her presence unobtrusive as she moved through the camp. Clara worked at the cataloging tent, her movements mechanical, her eyes darting to the guarded case. Miss Marple approached, her tone gentle. "My dear, you seem so troubled. Is it the amulet's departure?" Clara's hands trembled, a shard slipping from her grasp. "It's just. Dr. Ashby wanted it safe, for history. I worry it won't be." Her voice held a note of desperation, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead maid who had feared exposure for her master's crimes. "Did you ever see that key, the one near the lion?" Miss Marple asked softly. Clara shook her head, too quickly. "No, never. I don't know anything about it." Her denial was sharp, and Miss Marple filed it away, a thread of doubt. Sir Henry, pacing near the main trench, was her next focus. "Sir Henry," she said, her voice warm, "you must be relieved to see the amulet secured. Such a treasure for your legacy." His laugh was forced, his eyes avoiding hers. "Relieved, yes. It's a fine piece, but it belongs in a museum, not here." His hand brushed his pocket again, and Miss Marple wondered if the key rested there, like a St. Mary Mead banker's stolen ledger hidden in a coat. "You knew of its value," she said, her tone innocent. "Did Dr. Ashby share its hiding place with you?" Sir Henry's face reddened. He hinted, "That's all." "I'm no archaeologist, Miss Marple." His defensiveness was a clue, and she smiled, letting him think her satisfied. Yusuf, directing laborers near the lion, was harder to read. "Mr. Yusuf," she said, pausing near him, "the amulet's journey to Cairo must ease your mind. You spoke of men dying for less." His dark eyes met hers, unyielding. "It belongs to the past, not to thieves," he said. "I hope it stays safe." His words were measured, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of intensity, like a St. Mary Mead poacher guarding his territory. "And the key?" she asked gently. "Could it have come from the camp?" Yusuf shrugged, his face impassive. "Many things are lost in the sand. I do not know." His reticence was a shield, and she wondered what it protected. Evelyn sketching in her tent was her final stop. "Dr. Strath, the amulet's departure must be bittersweet," Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. "Such a find for your research." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "It proves my theories, not Ashby's. He'd have claimed it for himself if he'd lived." Her bitterness was raw, and Miss Marple saw a pride that burned like a St. Mary Mead scholar's vendetta. "Did you know of its hiding place?" she asked. Evelyn's pencil paused. "No, Ashby was secretive, but I knew it existed." Her admission was careful, and Miss Marple noted it. A thread of ambition as night fell. Miss Marple and Khalil took their positions in a concealed spot near the lion, hidden by a cluster of rocks. The camp was dark, the guards stationed at the amulet's case under strict orders to appear lax. The moonlight bathed the ruins, casting the lion's gaze in sharp relief. Miss Marple's heart was steady, her senses alert, as she recalled a St. Mary Mead stakeout that had caught a thief by candlelight. Hours passed, the desert's silence broken only by the rustle of wind. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, moving toward the amulet's case with stealth. Miss Marple's breath caught as she recognized Sir Henry's bulky silhouette, a satchel in hand. He knelt by the case, fumbling with a Keitha-tarnished one, she suspected, and opened it. Retrieving the amulet with a greedy haste, Khalil sprang forward, his men closing in, their lanterns flaring. "Stop, Worthing," he shouted. Sir Henry froze, the amulet glinting in his hand, his face a mask of shock and defiance. "This is mine," he blustered. "I funded this dig." Khalil seized the amulet, cuffing him as Miss Marple emerged, her expression serene. A search of Sir Henry's tent followed, and there, in the locked chest, Khalil found a bloodied glove, its weave matching the cloth near the lion, its stains matching the dagger's hilt. Sir Henry's face crumpled, his bravado gone, and Miss Marple saw the truth laid bare, like a St. Mary Mead merchant caught with stolen goods. In her tent, as the camp buzzed with the arrest, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her thoughts clear. The trap had worked, the moonlight revealing what daylight concealed. Sir Henry's greed had driven him to murder, but she knew the other secrets: Clara's fear, Yusuf's silence. Evelyn's pride had woven the net that caught him. In St. Mary Mead, truth had often surfaced in quiet moments. Here, it had needed the desert's light to shine. Chapter 10. The mask falls. The dawn at Tel al-Raqqa broke with a quiet intensity, the sun's first rays piercing the desert haze to reveal a camp transformed by the night's revelations. Miss Jane Marple sat outside her tent, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, her eyes scanning the subdued activity around her. The arrest of Sir Henry Worthing had sent ripples through the dig, the laborers whispering in hushed tones as they worked, their glances darting toward the command tent where Inspector Khalil now held the funder in custody. The golden amulet, safely returned to its locked case, gleamed under guard, its allure undimmed but its danger exposed. Miss Marple, her mind as sharp as the morning light, reflected on the trap that had snared Sir Henry at the moonlight vigil, the tarnished key, the bloodied glove, each a thread in the tapestry of truth she had helped weave. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unmasked a thief at a village fete. Here, the desert's stark clarity had revealed a murderer. The camp was quieter now, the tension of suspicion giving way to a wary relief. Yet Miss Marple knew that a confession was needed to seal the case, for Sir Henry's bluster, even when caught, was that of a man who believed wealth could shield him. She recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant who had denied his crimes until faced with undeniable proof, his defiance crumbling under the weight of evidence. Sir Henry's greed, evident in his eager grasp for the amulet, pointed to a motive as old as the ruins themselves. But Miss Marple wanted to hear his story, to understand. The moment when desire turned to violence, Inspector Khalil emerged from the command tent, his face lined with exhaustion but resolute. He approached Miss Marple, his respect for her now clear in his nod. "Miss Marple, your trap worked," he said, his voice low. "The glove, the key, the amulet in his hand, it's damning, but he's stubborn, claims it's all a mistake." She tilted her head, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "In my village, Inspector, a guilty man often denies until the truth is laid bare. Perhaps a conversation, with all the evidence before him, will loosen his tongue." Khalil nodded, his skepticism replaced by trust. "Join me then, your insight has been invaluable." They entered the command tent, where Sir Henry sat, his wrists bound, his florid face flushed with indignation. The locked chest, now open, stood in the corner, its contents ledgers, letters, and the bloodied glove spread across a table. The glove, its weave matching the cloth found near the lion, bore stains that Khalil's men had confirmed as human blood, likely Ashby's. The tarnished key, recovered from Sir Henry's pocket, fit the chest perfectly, a detail that had sealed his fate. Miss Marple, settling into a chair with her knitting, observed Sir Henry's restless hands, his eyes darting to the glove, then away, like a St. Mary Mead banker caught with forged notes. Khalil began, his voice sharp but controlled. "Worthing, the evidence is clear. The glove, the key, the amulet in your hands last night. You knew of the relic, argued with Ashby about it. Why did you kill him?" Sir Henry's jaw tightened, his voice booming with false bravado. "This is absurd. I funded this dig, poured my fortune into it. Why would I kill Ashby? The glove someone planted it." His eyes flicked to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally, but she met his gaze with serene calm, her needles clicking softly. Miss Marple spoke, her tone gentle but piercing. "Sir Henry, you spoke of a buyer in Cairo, a detail you shouldn't have known unless you planned to sell the amulet. Dr. Ashby, I believe, refused to let it go, didn't he? He wanted it for a museum, not a market." Sir Henry's face reddened further, his hands clenching. "Nonsense. I was interested, yes, but I didn't kill him." Yet his voice wavered, and Miss Marple saw the crack in his facade, like a Mary Mead merchant whose lies crumbled under scrutiny. Khalil laid out the evidence with methodical precision. The glove's blood matched Ashby's. The key opened the chest where it was hidden. The cloth near the lion bore the same weave, and laborers had overheard Sir Henry's heated argument with Ashby about a priceless find. "You were seen near the lion at dusk," Khalil added, "and your footprints match the compacted sand." Sir Henry's defiance faltered, his shoulders slumping. Miss Marple, her voice soft, added, "In my village, a man once killed to protect his profits. Greed, Sir Henry, can blind even the cleverest to reason." The words hung in the air, and Sir Henry's mask fell. His voice broke, a mix of anger and despair. "It wasn't meant to happen," he muttered. "Ashby was a fool sitting on a fortune, preaching about history. I offered him a share, deal with a buyer in Cairo. He threatened to expose me, said I'd never see a penny. I went to his tent to reason with him, but he laughed, called me a vulture. The dagger was there, on his table. I didn't think. I grabbed it, and—" He stopped, his hands trembling, and Miss Marple saw the truth in his eyes, raw and unvarnished, like a St. Mary Mead confession in a quiet parlor. Khalil pressed for details, and Sir Henry, his resistance gone, recounted the night. The argument escalating Ashby's refusal, the sudden rage that drove the dagger into his chest. "I wiped the hilt, hid the glove," he admitted. "I thought I could take the amulet later, after the dust settled." He buried his face in his hands, and Miss Marple, her knitting paused, felt a pang of pity, tempered by the certainty of justice. She recalled a St. Mary Mead grocer who had stolen from his own till, his remorse coming too late to undo the harm, as Khalil's men led Sir Henry away. Miss Marple stepped outside, the desert air cool against her face. The camp was stirring, the laborers gathering to hear the news, their whispers a mix of relief and awe. Clara approached, her eyes wide. "Is it true, Miss Marple, Sir Henry?" Miss Marple nodded, her smile kind. "Yes, my dear. Greed led him astray, as it often does." Yusuf, passing by, met her gaze with a nod, his silence now one of respect. Evelyn, standing apart, looked chastened, her pride subdued by the truth. Miss Marple returned to her tent, her knitting in hand, her thoughts clear. The confession had tied the thread. Sir Henry's greed, the amulet's allure, the dagger's theft. Yet she knew the others had played their parts, their secrets and desires weaving the net that caught him. In St. Mary Mead, truth had often emerged in quiet moments. Here, it had needed the desert's stark light to shine. She resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome, and felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, even as the desert whispered of mysteries yet to come. Chapter 11. Echoes of Resolution. The midday sun hung high over Tel Raqqa, its relentless glare softened by a rare veil of clouds that drifted across the desert sky. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath her canvas awning, her knitting needles moving. With their steady rhythm, the soft click a counterpoint to the murmurs of the camp. The arrest of Sir Henry Worthing had lifted the pall of fear that had clung to the dig, replacing it with a tentative calm, like the quiet that follows a storm in St. Mary Mead. The laborers worked with renewed purpose, their picks and brushes, uncovering the past under the watchful eyes of Inspector Halil's remaining men. The golden amulet, now secured in a locked case, destined for Cairo, no longer cast its dangerous allure, but its discovery had left an indelible mark on the camp. Miss Marple, her mind as clear as the desert air, reflected on the resolution of Dr. Ashby's murder, her thoughts weaving together the threads of human nature that had unraveled so dramatically. The camp's mood was one of cautious relief. The suspects now cleared of murder, moving through their tasks with a mix of gratitude and unease. Clara Merton, her notebook in hand, catalogued artifacts with a newfound determination, as if honoring Ashby's legacy could erase the shadow of his death. Yusuf ibn Zayed, his dark eyes less guarded, directed laborers with quiet efficiency, his presence a steady anchor. Dr. Evelyn Strath, her pride tempered by the case's outcome, collaborated with Clara on a new tablet, her sharp voice softened by a hint of humility. Miss Marple, observing from her shaded perch, saw in their actions the resilience of those who, like the villagers of St. Mary Mead, carried on after a scandal's dust had settled. She had spent the morning reflecting on Sir Henry's confession, his greed laid bare like a St. Mary Mead merchant's ledger exposed to the parish. His admission, the argument, the dagger, the desperate act, had tied the clues together: the bloodied glove, the tarnished key, the cloth near the lion, the shadow at dusk. Yet Miss Marple knew the others had played their parts, their secrets, and desires creating the conditions for Sir Henry's fatal choice. Clara's resentment, Yusuf's silence, Evelyn's rivalry each had been a spark, though only Sir Henry's hand had struck the flame. In St. Mary Mead, a village betrayal had once rippled through the community. Here, the desert had absorbed the shock, its vastness, a silent witness. Miss Marple wandered toward the cataloging tent, where Clara was sorting shards with care. "My dear," she said, her voice warm, "you're doing splendid work. Dr. Ashby would be proud." Clara's eyes, no longer shadowed by fear, met hers with gratitude. "I want to finish what he started," she said. "He believed in this. Dig in its history. I'll make sure his name is on the publications." Her resolve was firm, and Miss Marple saw in her the spirit of a St. Mary Mead girl who had rebuilt her life after a scandal. "And the amulet?" Miss Marple asked gently. Clara smiled faintly. "It's for a museum, as he wanted. I'll see to it." Miss Marple nodded, her heart eased by the girl's determination. Near the main trench, Yusuf was overseeing a new excavation, his commands soft but clear. Miss Marple approached, her smile kind. "Mr. Yusuf, the camp feels lighter today. Your guidance must be a comfort." He nodded, his face less guarded than before. "The desert heals," he said. "Ashby's work will go on, and I will help." His words carried a quiet pride, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead gamekeeper who had protected his land with similar loyalty. "You knew so much," she said, her tone light. "Did you ever fear the amulet's curse?" Yusuf's eyes twinkled briefly. "Curses are for those who steal. I guard, not take." His honesty was a balm, and Miss Marple sensed his secrets, if any were benign. Dr. Strath was at the edge of the site, sketching a tablet with Clara. Miss Marple paused, her voice admiring. "Dr. Strath, your collaboration with Miss Merton is heartening. A new chapter for Tel al-Raqqa." Evelyn's expression softened, her pride now tempered by reflection. "Ashby was wrong, but he wasn't a fool," she said. "I'll work with Clara to prove it his way, and mine." Her humility was new, and Miss Marple saw in it the growth of a St. Mary Mead scholar, who had learned from a rival's fall. "The amulet will tell its story," Miss Marple said. Evelyn nodded. "It will, and will tell it right." Inspector Khalil joined Miss Marple for tea, his demeanor one of quiet gratitude. "Miss Marple, your trap was brilliant," he said, his voice warm. "I doubted you at first, but you saw what I missed." She smiled, her needles clicking. "In my village, Inspector, people are much the same: greed, fear, pride. You only need to watch." He chuckled, a rare sound. "You're a detective in a shawl. Cairo will hear of this." She shook her head, her eyes twinkling. Just an old lady with a knack for noticing, Inspector. He laughed, promising to credit her in his report, though she waved it off, thinking of St. Mary Mead, where her triumphs were shared only over. As evening fell, the camp gathered for a simple meal, the firelight casting a warm glow. The suspects, now colleagues again, spoke of the dig's future, their voices lighter. Miss Marple, slicing her bread with care, felt the echoes of resolution, the harmony of a community healing, much like her village after a truth was told. The amulet, the lion, the dagger all had played their parts, but it was human nature, as always, that had written the story. She thought of Sir Henry, now in custody, his greed a cautionary tale, and of Ashby, whose passion would live on in Clara's work. In St. Mary Mead, resolution had often come quietly. Here it was no different, the desert's silence a fitting backdrop to truth. Miss Marple returned to her tent, her knitting in hand, her heart content. The case was closed, the threads tied, but she knew life, like her knitting, would always bring new patterns. She resumed her work, the needles clicking softly, and let the desert's peace settle around her, a quiet echo of home. Chapter 12. The Desert's Farewell. The morning sun rose over Tel El Raqqa with a gentle warmth, its rays filtering through a thin veil of dust that softened the harsh edges of the desert landscape. Miss Jane Marple stood outside her tent, her modest suitcase packed, her knitting neatly tucked into a woven bag at her side. The camp bustled with a renewed sense of purpose, the laborers' tools striking earth in a steady rhythm, their voices carrying a cautious optimism now that the shadow of Dr. Ashby's murder had lifted. The golden amulet, secured for its journey to a Cairo museum, no longer loomed as a source of strife, and Sir Henry Worthing's arrest had restored a fragile harmony to the dig. Miss Marple, her eyes bright behind her spectacles, felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved, much like the calm that settled over St. Mary Mead after a village mystery was laid to rest. She had spent the previous evening reflecting on the case, her thoughts weaving through the clues: the bloodied glove, the tarnished key, the cloth near the lion, the shadow at dusk that had pointed to Sir Henry's greed. His confession, raw and unsparing, had echoed the remorse of a St. Mary Mead merchant who had betrayed a friend for profit. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the others: Clara's quiet strength, Yusuf's guarded wisdom, Evelyn's chastened pride. Each had been touched by the tragedy, their flaws and virtues exposed by the desert's unforgiving light. She knew that human nature, whether in a village or a ruin, was a tapestry of desires, and she had merely followed its threads to the truth. As she prepared to leave, Clara approached, her notebook clutched to her chest, her face alight with purpose. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice steady, "I wanted to thank you. You've given us a chance to carry on Dr. Ashby's work." She held out a small parcel, wrapped in cloth. "It's his journal. He'd want you to have it, for helping us." Miss Marple accepted it with a gentle smile, her fingers tracing the worn leather. "My dear, you'll do him proud," she said, seeing in Clara the resilience of a St. Mary Mead girl who had overcome a scandal. "Keep the amulet safe, for history." Clara nodded, her eyes bright with resolve, and Miss Marple knew the dig would thrive under her care. Yes, Uf ibn Zayed passed by, his dark robes blending with the morning shadows. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet respect. "Miss Marple, you saw what we could not," he said, his voice low. "The desert thanks you." She tilted her head, her smile warm. "Mr. Yusuf, you know this land's secrets. Keep them well." He nodded, a rare smile touching his lips, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead gamekeeper whose loyalty to his land had mirrored Yusuf's. His silence, she now understood, was not deception but a guardian's caution, and she felt a kinship with his quiet strength. Dr. Evelyn Strath, working near the cataloguing tent, looked up as Miss Marple passed, Her sharp features softened, her pride tempered by the case's resolution. "Miss Marple," she called, stepping forward, "I misjudged you. Your insight, it's changed how I see this dig." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Dr. Strath, you and Clara will uncover wonders together. Pride is a fine thing when it serves truth." Evelyn's lips curved in a wry smile, and Miss Marple saw in her the growth of a St. Mary Mead scholar who had learned from a rival's fall. Their collaboration, she sensed, would honor Ashby's legacy. Inspector Khalil approached, his uniform crisped despite the dust, his face warm with gratitude. "Miss Marple, you've done what I could not," he said, his voice earnest. "Cairo will know your name." She shook her head, her knitting bag swinging lightly. "Just an old lady's observations, Inspector. You did the real work." He laughed, insisting he'd mention her in his report, but she waved it off, thinking of St. Mary Mead, where her triumphs were shared only over tea. "With friends? Keep the desert safe," she said, and he nodded, his respect cleared as she boarded the dusty bus to Cairo. Miss Marple opened Ashby's journal, its pages filled with his passion for the past. The final entry, "The key lies beneath the lion's gaze," was a reminder of the treasure that had sparked both wonder and tragedy. She hoped the amulet would find its place in a museum, its story told through Clara and Evelyn's work, not Sir Henry's greed. The bus rumbled forward, the ruins fading into the haze, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to home. In St. Mary Mead, she would recount the tale to her friends, omitting the danger but savoring the puzzle's elegance. "People," she mused, her needles clicking softly, "are much the same, whether under English oaks or desert suns." The desert stretched behind her, vast and eternal, its secrets safe for now. Miss Marple closed the journal, her heart content, and let the rhythm of the journey carry her toward the familiar lanes of home, where new patterns of human nature would surely await.